toss that rusty old grill into the lake and set that Barca Lounger on fire. This is the Dadward Spiral. You have now tuned into episode number 13 of the Dadward Spiral. My name is Aaron Pruner. With me is Eddie. Hi, Eddie.
Hi. It's good to see you, man.
It's good to see you. No one can see us, but it's good to see you. Thanks to everyone tuning in for another episode. Some interesting things have gone on in my life since last we chatted. But before we get into that, I want to send a shout out to Dragon Wagon Radio, who hosts the show. They got some cool merch on the website. If you want to go to dragonwagonradio.com and check all of the merchandise, coffee mugs, clothing out. And if you like our show, which I hope you do, or else why are you listening? Please go to iTunes and give us a review, subscribe, like us, send us flowers. You know, a little candygram would be nice. You know, send me a little Father's Day card in a few months. I'm gonna be 45. I'll appreciate it. How are you doing, Eddie?
I'm all right, man. I'm eating chocolate because it's that kind of day. It's noon on a Thursday as we record this, and I'm eating chocolate. So that should indicate to you the kind of day and kind of days that we've had. Nothing crazy, nothing out of the ordinary, just standard life stress stuff. But yeah, I'm sure you have quite a bit of that going on recently as well. And I think that, and the reason why, and by the way, for our listeners, this is not our opportunity just for our self-therapy as it is, although it is often that. It's going to tie into our guest a little bit later. It's also going to tie into some of the themes of what we're discussing today. And I think Aaron can definitely speak to that quite a bit more than I can. So,
well, I want to start this show by talking about some dad logic with you, Eddie.
Please. When
you become a parent, certain things in the world are viewed differently. Mm-hmm. If you are, and specifically, and I've run into this problem or this situation multiple times. You're out with your kid, you're in the car, you're in rush hour traffic, you're nowhere near a public restroom. Your child has to use the potty. What do you do? Do you break the potty out in the back seat or front seat of your car while you're stuck in traffic? You pull over to the red curb and have them go, which is something that happened to me with my daughter. Yes, you do. And it's just part of living. It's part of life. It's part of our reality at this point, because what is the other option if you don't have the facilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
You are surviving. That is survival mode. You're taking care of business. Am I correct in saying this? And
I would say that's right.
There is nothing wrong with that. So what then happens if you are faced with a situation like that yourself?
There's several
and I'm
ways
going
to
to
solve
explain.
this.
I'm going to explain. I'm about to share a story with you.
Sitting back now.
My first week on this new job that I just quit this week, I was working from home. That day, my wife was supposed to be taking a class at home. So my mother-in-law was coming over with her dog to watch my daughter while I was in the bedroom working, which already I'm setting myself up for a situation. That morning, my wife was going to take my car to work, but it turned out that a light was left on in my car and the battery was dead. So that morning was also street cleaning, and I had to get my car moved or else I would have gotten like a $70 ticket. I called AAA, had the battery jumped just in time, but I was supposed to start work at 9:00 in the morning. Street cleaning was at 10. I waited for the tow truck driver. I already told him I was going to be late in training. Tow truck driver gets there, jumps the battery. I get in. I drive a Prius. Now, I hadn't had my coffee or anything that morning, and I drove to get coffee. Parked the car, got out, went to get a cup of coffee. Right as I got out, I was like, fuck, that car's going to be dead again when I get back to the car. I got my cup of coffee from the local cafe, go back to the car. Car's dead because I didn't drive it around for 20 to 30 minutes to charge the battery like a fucking dumbass.
Oh boy.
So at that point, I had to call AAA again. I'm like now almost an hour late to work. I called AAA. They send a guy. It's going to be like a 25-minute wait. I realize at that point, I have to use the bathroom. We are living in a pandemic currently where still restrooms publicly are not available to people. I guess. And even at the cafe I ordered my cup of coffee from, they usually have a public restroom, closed. I'm in a nice part of Sherman Oaks. I'm pacing the street at this point. I put my coffee in the car because that's just fuel for a fire that I cannot put out. I'm pacing. It's getting worse, man. And the tow truck driver is like 20 minutes away. So I'm like, I'm going to have to make a decision at this point. I have two options: find somewhere to go or take a dump in my pants. And that second option is not okay with me. So I'm like formulating a plan in my head of what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I'm starting to scope out the area I'm in. I'm in this nice suburban Sherman Oaks area. I walked by a dry cleaners and I saw, oh, they have a Kleenex box at the door. I'm just going to grab a ton of tissues, just in case I need to take care of some issues here. And the guy inside looked at me crazy. And then I just, it got to a point where I'm like, well, this is happening and I can't stop it from happening. And there are no public restrooms anywhere around. So I ran to a place. I don't want to say specifically where, because I don't want to really fully incriminate myself, but let's just say it was near a river and there was some nice bushes and some tall grass. And I made it look like I was taking photos with my phone because there were people out jogging. There were people walking their babies in strollers. And it was like, okay, this is going to happen. Homeless people do this all the time. So it was like a 3-second drop my pants, went and just shoved a bunch of tissues down there and put my pants up. And right when I did that, I got back on this trail and a guy passed me. He's like, good morning. And I'm like, so happy I have my mask on. I get a call on my phone that the tow truck driver is at my car and I'm 2 blocks away from my car. So I had to run back to the car, deal with all of that after what I just did to humiliate myself in public. And then I got in my car. The guy said, oh, you just need to leave the car running for like 20 minutes. I'm like, are you sure? I drive a hybrid. Got in the car, drove home. At this point, I'm over an hour late in starting work. I left the car running in the car for 20 minutes. I had to park far from home because an accident happened in front of my house. I went in. I worked my day. My QAnon mother-in-law was here with her dog.
Oh, no.
My daughter was not really having it. It was super distracting all goddamn day. I was making mistakes left and right because I'm supposed to be editing work, writing. And I got to a point where I was like, fuck, this is not a good, I started my day on the wrong foot and I'm in a scenario right now where I just cannot focus or concentrate. My day ended at 5. We had dinner and I thought, I'm just going to go check my car. Walked to the car. My battery was dead. And I called AAA for a third time. And then I just went for a long drive and got myself some donuts. But that was the first week of the job that I no longer have. And that was my public pooping story. And I'm sharing that story. I'm not at all embarrassed. I'm not embarrassed at all because I feel like I made an important decision that was informed of the situation I was in. That was a survival mode kind of thing. Like I mean, there was no other option, Eddie.
Every parent is faced with a poop nightmare at one point or another. Just like, and by nightmare, I mean like a situation, not because like, oh, there's poop. Like poop is just a standard, especially with kids under potty training age. Poop, and even after, poop is just sort of like, it's like when you, it's like when I joined the military. It's like in the first couple of days they give you your pack that has all your gear in it, and you get this big loadout. It's like, here you go. The poop nightmare is part of the parenting starter pack. It's like you're going to have this bag of experiences that you're going to invariably experience. The poop nightmare is in there. I've had my experiences with it. For many parents, it's the explosive diarrhea mid diaper change. That's usually part of it. That's standard equipment. And then it's usually some sort of public facing poop nightmare. that just goes part and parcel with being a dad. So this probably isn't even your first poop nightmare.
For me or for
you.
my kid?
For you.
No. I keep thinking in my head, I wonder what happened when that was found. If it was found, I don't know. I left it behind, and now I'm admitting to you all what I had to do, and I had to. That was just it. I was, you weigh in your head. Well,
Right.
there's no public. Then I start thinking about all the homeless people in my area, what they have to go through, and then I just started feeling bad, just
Right.
and pissed off and angry. And that I took that into my entire day. And so that informed my day, which is what I was originally going to talk to you about when we were going to record last week, but it didn't end up happening. That's okay.
That's all right.
Because our lives are in flux. Our schedules are in flux.
Schedules are definitely in flux right now. That is for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's I work with an office that is primarily in Las Vegas, which is fine because it's the same time zone, but there's teams on the East Coast of Canada as well as Ireland. I have twice weekly calls with a cohort in I think they're in Croak. I need to ask them what part of Ireland they're in, but lovely people, love chatting with them, but like they're ending their day as I'm beginning mine. And this week we've been on a large group project that requires a lot of like synergy. And so I will, a great example, I created this sort of master document, this like 20 slide presentation, and I need collaboration with them, but because they're so late in the evening, I didn't see that many of them were requesting access, like edit access to this thing in the middle of the night for me. So it's like that part of it becomes like frustrating of trying to get everybody in sync. And then like right now we're still in kind of like, it's still late night over there right now, but they're still up working on it. And kind of like getting our final little notes in. So it's an interesting collaborative process. And it's it can be a lot. So I mean, that's not dissimilar from like what a lot of, I think, parents are, because like things are opening back up. There's definitely work to be had and be done. Some people are in office, some people are not. I just got my first COVID vaccine shot today.
Yeah, how do you feel?
I feel powerful, levitating a little bit. My footprints leave craters. But I'll get used to it. No, in all seriousness, I feel fine, a little lightheaded. So if I'm a little loopy on this podcast, beg forgiveness.
Did you get the whole pins and needles feeling in your arm?
No, I didn't get that. I got for a second, I got the shortness of breath, like almost like an allergic reaction that I get sometimes. So, and I do have a lot of allergies, but no medicine allergies. So I was curious to see if I'd feel any like reaction to it. And then just a little bit lightheaded, and then a little burpy. Nothing too crazy. So, like just now, like a little. But other than that, I feel pretty okay. So.
Yeah, it was weird when I got it. My whole arm just felt like it was asleep.
You mentioned your mother-in-law. My mother is I wouldn't say she's full QAnon, but she's QAnon adjacent. She's and I recently completed the Into the Storm documentary, the excellent documentary.
Yeah, I feel like mine is adjacent as well. Like she's not going to admit that she's full on into it, but the stuff that she says is very in line with.
Yeah, it's more towards that direction than not.
Yes,
and so so it's interesting. So it's interesting to see. It's interesting to watch that. I knew a lot of it. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts of it, but the access that guy had, and as a doc filmmaker myself, like it was really interesting to watch. I'm just curious what effect it's having on in-laws and what effect it's having on.
It's having none on mine. And I found out. I think it was yesterday, the day before. My mom told me my uncle, her brother. Man, and every time I hear about him, I just think about what happened in his life to make him go down this road. And again, it goes back to the accident that killed my grandfather. I feel like that is the main catalyst in sending my uncle to Idaho to live in more of a rural neighborhood away from big city life, like what he was doing in LA and in San Diego. And he his ideology over the years, like he was raised a Democrat, but he is now a hardcore Republican, an NRA member. He's, anti Dr. Fauci, voted Trump.
Jesus.
He like said to my mom, and he's 68 or 69. He's not going to get the vaccine. And his son, my cousin, I stopped following on Facebook a while ago because he was posting. I mean, a while ago, like years ago, because he was posting stuff about Barack Obama being a Muslim that's not an American, doing the whole birther stuff. And I'm just like, I don't have any time for this. And hearing that they're both, and his son is living with him in his house, not getting the vaccine because, quote unquote, they're fine and their friends are fine. And he said, if we were to talk further about this, we would get into an argument, is what he said to my mom. I'm just like, it doesn't surprise me, and yet it surprises me at the same time.
Exactly right. I feel like I can't call him a friend. I recently unfollowed him on Twitter just because I just couldn't do it anymore. And I won't name him, but he's, I don't want to say he's well known. He was a co-host on a well-known podcast. He's directed some music videos for some names. So he's in that tier. He's recently had like some personality changes and gotten big into crypto. And he posted a video.
That's all you had to say.
That's all you had to say. That's all you had to say. He got really, really big into crypto. He's retired from Hollywood. He's gotten big into crypto. That's like his arc the last 6 months. But he's our age, but he posted a video about like, hey, I just heard that Hank Aaron just died and he got the vaccine like 2 weeks ago. Like, I don't know about y'all, but that's not okay with me. And I'm going to wait. I'm like, yes. How old was, it's like the Prince Philip thing. It's like, he died. It's like, oh, he just got it like a month and a half ago. Yeah. He was also like almost
99. He
was months away from being 100. Like, maybe, I don't know, the more obvious thing that could kill a person, like being old as shit, is the thing that killed him. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. It's just
getting into crypto. I'm sorry. I'm still laughing about. It's like the other day, I'm outside drinking coffee and I'm listening to my neighbors who are very anti-vax, very pro-Trump, MAGA. We're blasting YouTube videos, really getting in deep about the Snyder Cut. And I'm like, there really is this Venn diagram where the overlap between anti-vaxxers and Gamergate folks and Snyder Cut people.
Well,
so
to be fair, there are some Snyder Cut people that are, like, we're legitimate. Just like, I just like his movies and I wanted to see the vision done, and that's fine. That's good for you. Glad you got your candy. And then there was like one guy that, remember, like it was right leading up to the Snyder Cut. They released this like little promo for it that was like,
no, I didn't focus. I didn't pay any attention.
It's okay. So they released this little promo that was like basically it was like this it was like a CG thing of this multifaceted, like almost like a sculpture of like all the characters, and like each one of them was like up against a pillar that had different affectations around their characters.
Okay, and yes, I have seen.
Yeah, and so with Batman, Batman was like up against a pillar, and there was like, so one of the affectations around it was like his mother's pearl necklace, kind of like in this orbit around him. And a Snyderverse fan posted online like, Zack Snyder is like the greatest filmmaker I've ever seen. Like Batman bound to a pillar of justice by his dead mother's pearls. And like, I just responded with the meme from Garth Marenghi's Dark Place, where Garth Marenghi says, I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards, because it's just like, it's like there's, the reason why I bring this up is that the reason I bring this, it's a great show. Go see it. I think it's still on Hulu. The reason I'm bringing this up is that like if I do see a commonality between Q and not just, I don't want to just blankly say Snyderverse fans, but like pop culture fans who latch onto a thing and have it become a cause. And like the folks I know who are really into crypto, is that when you're really into any of these things, it's sort of replaced.
You're not really into crypto. Stop
I used to. Okay, in fairness, I used to work at a tech company that had like that developed like blockchain tech. So I know people who engage with crypto in like a professional setting, but like the people who are like into it as a hobby or as like their path to wealth, the thing that all these things have in common is that it just sort of like replaces all the other parts of their personality. It
Yeah,
like it
sorry, I
just
was
becomes
laughing.
this. No, it's fine. I let you get your giggles out. It's totally fine. Like, and it is funny, but like the Snyderverse folks I've engaged with, they only post or think or like that's like the dominant thing in their lives, or
Yeah,
like or the Q folks. Like that's I mean, I saw this in certain members of my own family. Like it's all they fucking talked about. Like I
right.
remember just having a conversation with my mom a couple years ago where I'm like, can we just have a conversation about something other than like what are you into other than this? What are your hobbies? Like and it was hard for her to answer with anything other than that. And the Snyderverse folks, it's like I just be into other shit. If you were into other shit, it probably will prevent you from going far down into any one of these things.
And you know what? What we're going to be talking a lot about in this episode, even though we're now like 25 minutes in and we've started with poop and now we're talking about QAnon, is authenticity has been on my mind a lot over the past few weeks. And when I say authenticity, I mean being true to yourself in who you are and what brings you joy. And I feel like just the concept of truth in the world in general is so skewed right now. We talked about when Jeff Canada was on this whole post-truth reality, which I still can't wrap my head around that notion. But like being true to yourself, I was working at a place. I'm not going to name the name of the website, but it went against every fiber of my being to take the job because they have a really bad reputation in my industry for exploiting writers and doing what Drew McQueenie was talking a lot about when he was on the show about the ways in which film criticism has just gone towards the direction of marketing. And this website, I have not seen Batman versus Superman or Justice League or any of these movies. The amount of articles I have edited over the past 2.5 weeks, I could tell you the beginning, middle, and end of Justice League, the Snyder Cut. Don't know what a dark side is, but I have edited articles about Darkseid, about the Joss Whedon cut, like all these things I do not need to know about in my life because they don't really bring me the joy I was referring to. The joy that I was looking for in this job was the paycheck. And we had a emotional talk here at home where my wife begged me to leave the job, not just because of the type of work and the ways at which it wasn't fulfilling my soul, but also because it was not conducive to my responsibilities here at home and otherwise. But I'll tell you, as soon as she said that, a huge weight lifted off my shoulder because I just kept going back to thinking there is other stuff I want to do in my life and other things I want to put out into the world that I think is more impactful and more serving to, I don't know if the common good is the right term here, but when you get so buried in one topic, whether it's QAnon or Justice League, Snyder Cut, whatever it is, and that is it, and then you're working in a job that just adds fuel to just those topics, I could see the tunnel vision. I can see it. I can not necessarily living in it myself, but it made me feel so claustrophobic. Do you know what I'm saying? Emotionally claustrophobic. And I can only imagine when you're in like a QAnon frame of mind or just, in a type of community where this is the end all be all of your life, how emotionally claustrophobic that can end up feeling. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I do. I definitely do.
So this week, this episode, we are going to be joined by somebody who I hope we can talk more with about finding that sense of authenticity in your creative work and how, as parents, we can communicate that and champion that. Because that, I feel like it's harder and harder to just be open and teach a person to be open with compassion and love. A kid, even though I think kids are kind of armed with that in general when they're brought into the world, but we tend to operate off of fear, I think, more than not. So joining us this week is let's see here. How do I introduce you? You're a comedian, you're a comedy writer, you've done podcasts. I remember you did an episode of Fangirling at Nerdist with my friend Alicia Lutz back when she was at Nerdist.
I was a host.
You were a host
You
for a
were a
while
host.
on season 2, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You were a panelist at places like Comic-Con and other conventions, but more importantly, you're just an awesome person, and I'm so excited to have you on here. Dani Fernandez has joined the show, and you know what? You're just the second woman we've had on the show. This is a show about fatherhood, and we need to get more voices that speak on different perspectives and experiences in this world. You don't need to be a father to be on our show. So thank you for joining us.
For sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
We actually referenced you in a previous episode because I had seen one of your TikTok videos where you talked about, I'm going to probably screw up the phrasing of this, but neurolinguistic conditioning.
DBT?
Yeah, DBT. Specifically with the phrase that you had about using and instead of,
yes.
But for me, that like when I saw that, I think a lot of times we think very deep thoughts around a concept or a premise, and it's a lot of sort of sweat equity to try to like get to a revelation or a conclusion. But seeing that video of yours just made like so many things align for me. Go like, oh God, yeah, okay, that's an easy thing to incorporate while addressing my very complicated relationships with my family. So like when having you talk about that, and especially because the pilot you sold to HBO has a lot to do with sort of your experiences in the mental health system. It was a big motivator for us because, just like we talk a lot about in this podcast about how we as parents, specifically as fathers, we have to be very mindful of our kids' mental health while at the same time constantly working on ourselves because our kids are always learning from our behavior no matter what we're doing. And, what are it can often feel like insurmountable, the amount of effort you have to do to manage both. But simple things like that, I think, are really impactful and powerful. I'm not leading to a specific question. I think it's just a lot of the stuff that you're talking about seems to align well with that. If you could talk about how little things that you've picked up or worked to help you recontextualize your own past or make sense of it, if to your comfort level.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy, and die meaning two. So it's like two seemingly opposing statements that seem like opposites can actually exist at the same time is actually very healing. I feel like it's such an important way to incorporate trauma and allowing these deferring. So a lot of, as far as fathers, a lot of it can go to family. It's like the example I used is, I forgive my father and I don't want to see him again. Like the fact that both of those could be true and valid, as opposed to but, which makes only one of them true, right? Typically you'll say, I forgive my father, but, which kind of negates the first part of it. But saying, I love my mom. This is an example. It's not my mom, but I love my mom and she's an addict and I can't have her in my life anymore. Like those, so looking back at our growing up, I think a lot of the trauma that I experienced growing up and still experience trauma, just being a woman of color in America, I think you can have really, I would say even if we're talking about immigrants, it's like my family immigrated here and it's like they, for a quote unquote better life or whatever the reason might be. And it still is a really terrifying country to live in. There are people even people of color who have served. Actually, Latinos make up some of the biggest portion of the military. We're actually some of the most decorated. And a lot of my family has been in the Navy, Air Force, and Marines. But so it's, people of color have served in this country and, might hate elements of this country. And so that's also a reason why I hate when they say like, well, just leave. And I want to be like, well, technically the land that I'm on, my ancestors have been here.
Right.
So technically like their bones are underneath the land that like I'm currently on. And anyways, so that it's a lot, but yeah, so I feel like that helps us with our conflicted feelings, that they're both valid. And yeah, I think just to wrap up though with the super heavy conversation that we just had so that people don't write me hate mail, is that I think you can use DBT for, Spanish is such an important part of my culture. It is my last name. It is the names of my family members. It is, uh, passed down from generation to generation. And I can also accept that it wasn't the native language that was spoken on this land, or the land that is known as Mexico. And it's not an indigenous language. And also it is really problematic. One side of my ancestors probably did something really horrible to another side of my ancestors. And both of those can exist, right?
Yeah.
And it can still be a beautiful language that we name our children after. That is my surname. That is, so making space, and that's what I feel like is lost on social media. I want to say that is completely lost. It's very black and white. It's either you agree with this thing or you agree with this thing.
Yeah.
And there's no room for like, we are a very complicated species. I think my community can be very complicated. I think my religion, my family's very Catholic. Catholicism is also homophobic, and I am queer. I think like all of those things can exist, and DBT for me helps making all of this valid, all the conflict and elements of it valid. But I feel like whenever I try to have these conversations, it gets shot down immediately, or you're seen as not being a team player. You're not, all of that. So, or you're seen as hating your family because you distance yourself from your family, and it's like, this is what I have to do to survive.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean, if you cut someone out of your life, it doesn't necessarily mean you hate them. It just means that for your mental health and for your healing, you might not be able to have them in your day-to-day life. And I just feel like I've done so much therapy that I'm able to hold space. That's what I would say, is asking people, especially people listening to this, hold space for both of those things to be true.
Yeah. Yeah, we try, and just to kind of give you, and I've talked about this on the show before. I never wanted to be a dad. I now have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and I grew up in the aftermath of an accident. A palm tree killed my grandfather 3 years before I was born by falling on my grandfather and grandmother's car on my grandmother's birthday. My mom did not deal with the trauma of that. My uncle, who is now a far right-wing QAnon NRA member, moved to a rural neighborhood, and he's never met my daughter or my wife. And I kind of grew up in the aftermath of that trauma and didn't know how to handle it. And there was a lot of fear and anger and anxiety that I was carrying with me throughout my life that came to a head when I learned I was going to be a dad, and all these things, because I never knew my dad. And talking about these issues about that, I mean, that's what's it called? DBT.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that it's still hard for me to wrap my head around, because I'm still holding on to yes, there's this statement, but also I am firmly rooted in my anger and depression and resentment. And, there was a time I tried to kill myself, and then 3 months later I was on VR Troopers doing slapstick comedy. It's like this weird dynamic in my life, which has been be this funny comedic guy on camera, but also deal with all this dark shit off camera. And I know that you worked in stand-up, and you write comedy, and there is the trauma you just referenced. We don't have to go deep into that, but specifically, and this isn't really talking from a parenting perspective, I just want to know from a you perspective, how has that helped you writing comedy in sort of reconciling the stuff you've had to deal with in your life?
I mean, I feel like comedy is a great coping mechanism for trauma. I feel like a lot of us I feel a lot of people in entertainment and specifically comedians or people that pursue comedy, there has to be like something wrong with you to want to pursue this life. I don't think any normal person would. I think if I had a normal childhood, I would not have pursued. If I had like happy parents and a happy life, I would, be some doing something else that's not entertaining. That's not seeking validation. Also, I want to say that entertainment is seeking outside validation constantly. I think we feed off of that. And it's not enough for your work to just exist. It's like you want to make others laugh. You actually want to relate to others. I feel like
Yes.
a lot of times we're like the class clowns, and to me that is definitely a coping mechanism. I feel like a lot of times the class clown had walls up, was overcompensating for something, and found humor was a way to. I know my ex Mark Ellis was bullied a ton for his way. I was bullied as well. He's a stand-up comic, and he was bullied a ton growing up, and he was a class clown. And I think that was his way. You look at like Chris Farley and stuff, and it's like that was their shield when they knew that they would be, how to relate, connect, get people to kind of, see them as human, was to make them laugh. And yeah, so I think that a lot of times that's why we pursue what we pursue. But I definitely think therapy is still necessary. I don't think comedy is therapy. I've as someone that's done therapy, I think it's a coping, it's a great storytelling tool to connect us to other people. But I think, actually doing trauma treatment was necessary for me.
Right.
So
and
interesting you mentioned
same
that.
here.
Yeah, because like I think for like a lot of times, Aaron and I are roughly the same age. We're kind of like in this, back half of Gen X kind of, age group. And I don't know about you, Aaron, but one thing I constantly heard from a lot of peers and people who were slightly older than me in both personal and professional environments was this, and I heard this 9 times out of 10 from men as opposed to women, was blank is my therapy. Going to the gym is my therapy.
Yeah.
Writing is my therapy. Performing is my therapy. Training to fight is my therapy. Like, and I, all the dudes I trained with, love them to death. But 201, anybody who said that jiu-jitsu or Muay Thai was your therapy, that ain't it, bro. Like that is the symptom saying you need therapy. Like, I mean, if myself included, like, so I think why is it a Western culture thing? Is it a hustle culture thing that we have to like, I don't know, monetize our gigs or our passions and look to our work to like solve all these other problems in our life? I'm really just putting it to the room. Why is this constant thing that we can substitute therapy for just a deep dive into a hobby or a profession?
For me, it was, I felt like I had a sense of control over it was ego and it was fear, because, I would book commercials. I would do the craziest shit on VR Troopers, where like looking back on it, I got waterboarded for laughs. And I feel like that right there is a lovely metaphor about where I was in my life, that I was putting my whole life into making other people laugh. And then I would hit the lowest of lows when we would go into hiatus or when we would stop shooting. And then I would book the next thing and I would put it all into that. And I would come off on a high and I would go into these lows. But I would just thought that was normal, that was just a part of it. I thought I was normal until, the stuff with Sarah happened and I really had to come to grips with my own life. And that's the first time I went into therapy. And I thought that, you had to be a really broken person to be in therapy. And the therapist told me that he wasn't going to put me on medication because I haven't tried to harm myself. And I'm like, that's the prerequisite here. And just talking about everything that led me to this point really opened my, like, I suffered such bad separation anxiety. And it wasn't until therapy that I remembered in this random moment that my grandmother, who blamed my mom after the accident happened, because my mom never visited her in the hospital the entire time she was there for the 6 months after the palm tree, blamed her. My mom went on a trip when I was 3 years old, and she told me my mom was never coming home at 3. And it was in that moment in therapy that opened my eyes to, oh my God, all those years ago, I was given this one thought that my mom was going to forget about me at some point, which led me to a behavior that exhibited itself in many different ways in dysfunctional relationships throughout my life. Because I would then view that fatherhood means that I'm cursed and that I'm going to die. And being in a relationship means that eventually I'm going to be forgotten about and left. And it wasn't until getting into therapy that I was really able to identify those things. Acting didn't identify that for me. You know what I mean?
Well, I feel like a lot of what you listed as far as like working out is therapy or comedy is therapy, I think those things are therapeutic. And I
Yes.
think there's a lot of obstacles to therapy. There's a whole stigma, like you were just saying, um, that unless you are suicidal or have self-harm, I think actually everyone should be in therapy, even if you
Mhm.
aren't suicidal. I think waiting to the point that you break is not healthy. I also think just living in America is traumatizing. It is.
Yes.
Like thinking that you might be shot at any moment, school shootings, sending your kids out, like, all of that is terrifying. A movie theater, like living in this country is traumatizing. And so I think also living in a white patriarchy is traumatizing. And so it's all of it. And so I think the way that we toxic masculinity, like it takes years to undo the learning that y'all have dealt with. And so I think that's an obstacle, is the stigma. I think there's an actual obstacle to therapy, and that a lot of people say like get help. And my big thing is like, what does that look like? You say get help, but like it's very difficult here in LA to find a therapist that takes insurance. I am
Yeah.
lucky that I have enough money that I jumped therapists. Like I let go of one therapist, was looking for another, and forgot how hard it is. So many of the therapists are booked up here. So many of them don't take insurance. So many, like, it was wild. I had to check myself into an intensive, an IOP program, which is an outpatient program where you go home every day, as opposed to inpatient where you're
Mm.
hospitalized and you're in the hospital every day in group therapy. So I was in an outpatient program, but the only reason I could do it is because I had insurance. So
Yeah.
I had a friend this summer who was suicidal, and I was trying to get her into the program, and they wouldn't take her because she didn't have insurance. So there are actual physical obstacles to getting help. And then once you're in therapy, like you said, you might have a therapist who's kind of a I was going to say scum. I guess that's what came to. Not all therapists are great. Not just because you got your
No.
No.
degree doesn't mean you're good. A lot of people, professionals, just because you're a professional or a doctor. I mean, we've seen countless stories of like women of color who their doctors quite literally do not listen to them. Serena Williams almost died,
Right.
and and she's a millionaire.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because they didn't, even listen to her. And so just because someone's a professional doesn't mean, so, we often equate it to dating, and that it might take a while for you to find the right match.
Right.
But there are actual limitations. I want to say, yes, I talk about therapy and I encourage people to go to therapy. And I'm very aware that not everyone has that luxury, not everyone has that privilege. Um, Even people in small towns where it might be more limiting to do some of the treatments, like a lot of the treatments that I've been able to do is because I'm here in LA, and it's, I feel bigger cities have things like TMS. I did TMS, which is where they like put electrodes on your head and stimulate understimulated areas. I've done
Yep.
clinical ketamine. Ketamine is
Oh,
illegal,
wow.
but you can do it with a doctor legally for depression. I've done a bunch of things. Guess what? Because I live here in LA, where someone in a smaller rural town, I know because they tweet at me when I tweet, I did this, and I try to be really vulnerable and share with people, just because I know when I was spiraling and in the darkness and trying to find anything, if something has worked for me, I try to share it just so people, it might work for them, it might not, but it
Mhm.
might be a tool in their toolbox. But a lot of people in other areas don't always get that. So there's so many obstacles to getting help, and that's why it is very difficult when people are like get help. uh
Yeah. And it also feels condescending, right? Just
For
like get
sure.
help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tweeted
you know,
about suicide rate because suicide rates have been up during this pandemic, and that's
Yeah.
as a suicide survivor, it's like probably the thing that's most important to me in my life and in my work. And somebody replied and said, "Suicide is never the answer," and I wanted to be like, "Yes, sir, thank you. Yes, we're aware.
Thank you
Like,
for
thank you.
mansplaining suicide for me.
Yes,
Yeah, Jesus.
but it's just so the way that
Yeah.
people. Sorry, I'm gonna get off this soapbox in 1 second.
No,
So
take
No,
your time. We
take
brought
your
you
time.
here with soapbox ready and dusted off for you with like a little
Well, I
plaque
have
with
one
your
more
name on
thing
it.
I wanted to say, and that a lot of that toxic masculinity and the macho like tough mudder dudes
Mm.
that are like, suicide is a weakness or whatever,
Yeah.
like they were weak, it's selfish. They also say suicide is selfish.
Yes.
And
Yes.
for me, what I often say is that was not the first time that person was suicidal. This person
No.
has lived. You have no idea how many times they pulled themselves out of bed, brought themselves to work, took care of their kids,
How hard they
like
fought.
how hard they fought, how many days they were brave until it finally broke them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I hate when people say that it's weak or you're, selfish or, this is never the answer. How could, stop being so weak about it and suck it up or whatever.
Yeah.
You can't suck up you can't suck up
No.
trauma.
Right.
100%.
You can't
And
just that'll blow
I
up too. That's why we see, I want to say, school shootings and all of that.
Right,
is people
yes.
trying to suck up and not address trauma.
I've
That's-
talked about this on the show. I tried to take my life at the age of 17, and it was that year that if I had access to a gun, I would have shot up my school. If I had access and knew that that was an option, and this was way back before Columbine happened. That's it. That's it right there. You nailed it. And thank you for saying that.
I'm reminded of the movie Boys Don't Cry, and there's a little anecdote from the set of that movie where it's towards the end of the movie, content warning of that movie, obviously, but there's obviously a very brutal act of there's a few brutal acts of violence, but in the first one of the male actors in between takes broke down crying because it was just a lot. It was a lot for him to have to perform committing those acts, and the director, whose name it's forgetting me, gosh, but Christine Vachon was the producer, but I'm trying to remember the director's name. But anyway, so she walked over to the actor and she said, like, "Are you okay?" And he was just, talking it through. And she's like, "Listen, it's good that you're crying. It's good that you're crying because the guy who did this in real life couldn't." And
Right.
and that kind of helped.
Kimberly Pierce.
Yeah, great. God, what, man? Why isn't she working more? So, and that's, you see that a lot, obviously, and it kind of like brings me to this other thing, which is, one thing that Aaron and I have talked about on this podcast before when it comes to parenting is finding the balance of caring for your children and your partner, but as well as holding space for yourself. I have a lot of friends who are maybe 8 to 10 years younger than me. I'm in a sort of a friend group Discord. And, when we all sort of like vent about things, my friends are sort of reminding me like, remember to take care of yourself. And I'm like, I have a literal several children who require me to live just straight up, like just because of capitalism and all this other stuff. So like for you, how do you, because you have all these followers, you have a lot of people who come to you. Obviously, we reach out to you because of your experiences with this stuff. How do you find that balance?
I actually reached out to her because she posted a video of a woman eating a sandwich in a very crazy.
Okay, yeah,
like,
no joke. Your Twitter is hilarious. Like your Twitter, like
if he's a friend of mine, I gotta get Dani on.
If he is a friend of mine, so just to see like your banter back and forth on Twitter, like brings me no shortage of joy. But like, how do you like? For you, how do you manage or to what degree do you struggle with being there for literal strangers who are coming to you for help while at the same time holding space for yourself and establishing your own boundaries of your own care? How is that for you? Are you okay? Like, how does that process work for you?
I don't have the best boundaries. I mean, I definitely use the mute button a lot, but it's very difficult for me that people accuse. I feel I'm doing the most a lot of the times. And I think a lot of people might be new to my page. And so when I start talking about something, they're like, oh, it must be nice. You're a TV writer, it must be, and I've talked about this quite a bit. I'm also in the queer community, and I often find it is white queer people who do it. it's really weird. It's like no matter what space they're in, white people have to be the face of that community, and it's definitely something we've dealt with in the queer community as well. And it's very difficult for me that I don't deal with it with people of color typically trying to take me on, but a lot of times I'll deal with white feminists is another one I deal with often, needing to be the center of attention in my tweets, needing to be included in all of my tweets. And sometimes I'm like, it's not for you. Like I'll be tweeting about something and they're like, well, what about me? And I'm like, well, it's not for you then. I'm sorry. I cannot speak to the entire community. I can't speak to the entire queer community either. I can't speak to, but it's wild to me that they don't realize that they're so used to being raised in a white society that even in these other spaces that the rest of us are in that are marginalized communities, they still want to be the center or be included in all of those. And I don't need to be included. I don't need to be included in every space. I don't need to be included in conversations in the Black community other than me talking about anti-Blackness in the Latino community. I don't need to be included, in the front and center in Southeast Asian community. Like it's very fascinating to me, or even in queer, if lesbians are having a conversation and I am bi, I don't write them and be like, what about bi people though? And but they do that to me. And I find that, and I don't know if they realize how problematic they are. So what I will say is a lot of times people are new to my page. They find me because a tweet of mine went viral and they come and they're like, well, why aren't you talking about that? And I normally just, all I Google is my name and that subject and I'll just send it to them,
That's a flex, man. Oh my goodness.
I mean, because I have, but also I just did a thread yesterday. About how a lot of POC shows are not promoted.
Yes, I wanted to talk about that.
They're buying POC shows, but they're not I know, because One Day at a Time was not promoted. Like it didn't have a great promotional budget. I never saw commercials for it. And in order to save it, we had to literally do a social media campaign amongst each other. And that's not the only one. There's tons of shows like that.
Right.
And at the end of the thing though, I said, and yet I have such little power, and I talk about this constantly. Meanwhile, your white fave creators who might have gotten $100 million deal over at that channel are not speaking up on it at all. And a lot of these white creators who are coming up right now, who are popping off, and whether they're comedians or storytellers or, whatever, they made an indie film and now they have an HBO deal, they're not speaking about it either. We're the only ones that the marginalized people keep having to speak up, even though we have such little privilege. But I do try to use what privilege I have. I try to talk about how in my community, I am what's seen as the default, I would say, for Latinas. I talk about that quite often. I think when there's a Latina role that's up, I don't even know if they often consider my Afro-Latina sisters. And that is, I've done entire threads on that. But sometimes people are new to my page and they think that I haven't. And so that's exhausting because my friends are like, you shouldn't have to prove yourself to them. And I'm like, but I want them to like me and know that I am speaking up on this.
Right.
It's very hard when people that I respect are like, why didn't you talk about this? And I'm like, oh, I did literally last week. Here it is. And it's like, well, my friends are like, you can't do that for everybody. You can't reply to everybody. And I'm like, but when white people do it to me, it's different. But when people within my own community do it, it does. I'm like, no, I promise you I am. And even not on that, on WGA panels, I'm in rooms that people don't even get to see where I'm talking about that. And so that is a problem that I feel like meanwhile, I'm not going to name them, but some of your favorite like Marvel actors never talk about it. They have millions of dollars and everyone, they're beloved.
And producer credits.
Yeah, I see memes of them and we love them and we love their dogs and we love all this stuff. But like, let's go after Dani Fernandez, who already is speaking up a ton, but let's make sure that that's all she gets to do is speak up on it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this actually, because the talk of we try, and Eddie said earlier about language. Language has been very important in my household in how we communicate our feelings and also just how we communicate around each other. And it wasn't until recently that I started thinking about how language was used around me when I was a kid that ended up forming certain, emotional connections to things that ended up being destructive later on in my life. But we have been trying very hard. We're working very hard to bring diverse stories to my daughter in her children's books. And about a month ago, she wanted us to put one book in the closet because she was afraid of it. And we got her to tell us because the man on the cover of the book had darker skin and he was scary. And that opened up a lot of conversations and a lot of teaching moments with her. And in turn, the book became one of her favorites. It's still in rotation. But in regards to storytelling on a grander scale, with what you're referring to, and you are in a position to pitch stories and hopefully get your stories made and seen by a wider audience. Do you have thoughts on how to change these hearts and minds? I mean, does it start with that sort of education in the home? Speaking as a white man, that's I mean, I grew up in a very Mexican neighborhood, so I also was one of the only white kids in my neighborhood. So I grew up already immersed around other cultures. Mind you, there was a lot of gangs too, but now I'm married into a family that are very white, very Christian. My mother-in-law does not believe she has white privilege because she had a harder time growing up, where I'm like, you still live in Orange County, you still have a house, and you're still white, So I'm wondering.
Well, what I also say to those, because I get those comments a lot too. And it's like, well, I had a woman, a 60-year-old woman who was like, I was poor. I had to work 3 jobs. I had to, I was on food stamp or whatever. And she was like, I was saying like that she didn't have privilege. And I said, yes. Now imagine doing literally exactly that, working 3 jobs, being on food stamp, whatever, and being targeted by the police and being denied bank loans and having your white neighbors call, not being able to rent in the community, having them call the cops on you, being fearful for your life every time you get pulled over. Like, imagine doing all of those things of being poor and also, living in a country that literally hates you and you could die at any moment. And so that's what I typically tell to people like that. It's not that you didn't have that you weren't poor.
Right.
But like some people are poor and deal with the cops like murdering them, or throwing, people in cages, or like, like I said, like denying your like loans, or dealing with racism, with even trying to get a job working at a grocery store by a racist store owner. Like so yes. So that's typically what I tell to try and get them to grasp it, is like someone has lived your exact life, but even harder because of their
with
skin
a layer,
with
of
another
things.
layer of
on top of it,
terror and trauma.
That's what I try to. I mean, that's what I've. Go ahead.
I was just wondering, do you feel like how do you change it? How do you change it? I read your tweets and I'm like, I agree, and I'm with you, and I don't know how to fix it other than educating where I can. And on a parental level, most of my educating goes to my daughter and to my mom.
Right. But here's what and I don't want to answer for Dani, but like the onus and the burden should not be on her in public saying this stuff. The onus and the burden is on us saying this in private in white spaces. The onus and the burden should be us. Same thing with misogyny and sexism, is that us in the locker room, the boys will be boy shit, us putting a hard line down amongst other white men and saying, this is not okay. This is not acceptable. Fuck that. I was in my I don't want to say which member of my in-laws, because it's just not fair to them. It's public space, and they're great people who had a dead angle on this stuff. And they made a comment, and I was in the backseat of the car with both of them. Again, men who I love very much, who are a part of my family. But I had to make it clear that shit is simply not acceptable around me. And you know what? Even if they only stop saying that shit around me, that's one less space for saying it. So it's like, that's the onus is on us, Aaron. The onus is on us to do this in every interaction, public and private. It's easy to get a hashtag going. It's easy to get like a lot of people to like enthusiastically smash the heart button on Twitter. It's another thing to force a person in private one-on-one to say that that's not okay. And listen, I'll fully confess, like there's been moments where I just didn't have it in me for various reasons. And all I can do is say, like, you know what, I can't fuck up and let that shit slide again. I have to put in the effort and double down, and just the next time an opportunity like that presents itself, do so. Also, you and I both in various capacities have at various times had a hiring capability. So having the ability to hire and empower other folks and to just give advancement and promotion to folks who are just as likely, and fuck it, even if they're not like fully qualified. I know I, for one, was not fully qualified to earn some positions I've had over the years. And I was given that opportunity and then I rose to the occasion. We have to take that same mentality when we hire people who are from like sort of disadvantaged places. Like, again, I don't want to answer for anybody else, but like as white dudes, that responsibility is ours and ours alone. Like we shouldn't put that burden and that very real work and labor on known activists like Dani.
I have like three. I'm going to try and make sure I remember all of it because while you were talking, it came up with like three different points I wanted to address. One of them is there is a bias when you're hiring, and that I realized even with comedy writers, is that you are more, someone could say like, well, I hired the best person for the job. Is it someone whose script you read, who you related to because they had a similar sense of humor and similar life that you had lived? I look a lot of times at late night writers, and a lot of them, most late night hosts are straight white men. And a lot of the writers' room are straight white men because that is the comedy that they relate to, right?
Yes.
I've even had some of my friends who are black and brown who have been in there, and they're like, they can't even say some of these jokes that I'm writing. Like they're not allowed to say some of these jokes. But also it's and of course they can, I always say POC writers know how to write for white men actually very well than vice versa, because white men are the lens through which all media has been told, since the history of cinema. That has been the majority of the lens of all of these spaces. Only recently, I would say, have we even gotten more women, I would say white women in front of the camera. And then even smaller would be, or white female led films, like Wonder Woman, like Captain Marvel, like, and then even on a smaller level, women of color, like Issa Rae, or Never Have I Ever, even on a smaller.
Yeah.
But in the history of cinema, in the decades and decades that we have had it, it has been mostly white men. So it's actually easier for us. And Stephen L. Sears, who is a white writer on, I'm only pointing that out because I'm trying to contextualize this, on Xena, he actually said this on a panel that I was on with him, that it's actually much easier to write white men because that is the fishbowl that we live in, as opposed to turn around and him trying to write us because he hasn't had as much, y'all haven't had as much exposure to us on screen because we're not even really there, for you to consume as much of our material. So that is one thing I wanted to say when people say, the Academy Award should go to the best film. And it's like, okay, well, who is in the Academy? And is it possible that they relate to this film about these people that kind of look like them or literally look like them or have this life that they have lived more than some of the other films that they just don't relate to, so they don't resonate with it as much? So that is one thing I wanted to say as far as hiring or picking, the quote unquote best. Two, a lot of times my guy friends will be like, well, I know I'm just like a straight white guy. And I'm like, yes, but exactly. You can get into spaces that the rest of us can't. You can be a snake in there. You can be a weasel. You can weasel your way in and get it. You can talk to people who won't even talk to us. There are some people who are like, you're Mexican, I don't even want to speak to you. I don't even want to listen to you. They're already, biased. And I'm saying that as someone who sounds American. So I'm very aware of my privilege. I don't like to say I sound white because America, one, the British didn't even sound like this when they came over here. I think this is an amalgamation of all of us. There was a scene in Insecure where a girl asked Issa Rae, why do you sound white? And Issa is very clearly not white, but she is American. She grew up here, and that's why she sounds the way that I do. Whereas like Idris Elba is British, and that's why he, so I don't like saying that I sound white. I sound American. But same with my Asian American friends and vice versa. And, so that was what else? Yes. So you do play an important role in this. And I would say even speaking up on social media, I think a lot of times, I guess I feel like my white friends are scared that they're not going to say the right thing, so they don't say anything. I think you can amplify a lot of people in a lot of the threads, but I think you can also be like, why is this keep happening? As opposed to just having us standing out there on our own.
what I've tried to do is just I've made this mistake in the past of like, so a friend of mine, a person of color will make a point, and I so emphatically agree with it. And I occupy this weird little space. Like I have multiple um my family has multiple sort of like a lot of mixed ethnicity. My brother's half Chinese. My cousins are Mexican. My cousins are half Mexican, white presenting with the last name of Fernandez. My cousin Melinda married a dude who's also half white, half Mexican with the last name of Bauer. Their daughter is half Mexican. They all look white as fuck, whiter than me. But it's just interesting to see how like the layers of privilege went when Melinda went from being Melinda Fernandez to Melinda Bauer, right? Like, so it's very interesting to see just like that happen in real time. What I've tried to do is I so emphatically agree with some of these points, but I've made the mistake in the past of simply repeating the point back to the person in the process of agreeing with them. It's rooted in empathy of saying like, yeah, I agree with you because of X, Y, and Z. And all I'm doing is just restating the stuff they said. Whereas I've had to think about what is a better use of my response. Is it simply responding and laddering their own language back up to them? Or is it a retweet with a quote saying, hey, listen to this person? You know, just like what is the best use of it?
I think another thing is we're so exhausted from having to deal with racists online that I would much rather y'all call them out than me having to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
And even trolls, I so thank the people. I wish they would untag me, but I do thank the people who take on the trolls in my comments. That I do appreciate because so I don't have to. And it's not just even with racism. I deal with sexism. Like I had, men who have sent me dick pics or will be like, I would love to receive pics of titties. I don't understand why you wouldn't want to receive pictures of dicks. And I'll just quote tweet and be like, I don't have the time today if someone else has the time. And other men do. they'll reply to them. And so, and I love it because it'll be a bunch of men replying to a fellow man who they're taking the time so I don't have to. And I appreciate that infinitely. So that I don't have to.
My wife just came in. I guess my daughter just woke up. So this is the point in the show where we have to start closing out. I want to ask you one more question though, Dani. You on social media, you have a huge presence, and part of your message, I believe, is body positivity and confidence. Mm-hmm. And that is a thing that we definitely are championing here. And I've been stopped multiple times with certain words, I guess I have said that could be taken in the wrong way. And we've talked a lot about language throughout this episode, but with how social media works, especially now with young people and with the way our culture tends to already put huge expectations on women with how you present in public and how you look and weight and makeup and fashion and everything else. I'm curious, just from your perspective, talking to me, a guy who is in his mid 40s, who is a dad of a girl who she's going to get to an age where I am not at all going to understand how to relate or communicate or understand, maybe I'm assuming, how she wants to express herself or interact in the world. What sort of advice, or do you have any, for a guy like me in connecting to a girl like that in a realm like the one we exist in? Does that make sense?
I think, propping women up by things that aren't just their body, I think, is important, especially for young women. I see often dads will, aside from saying their daughter is beautiful, but it's like, you're funny, you're smart. Like I see that a lot with my guy friends when they're trying to, talk to the daughters. So it's not just about their appearance. Cause I think that can be that's how it was for me growing up. And I was actually going to say, when you said that you had your first attempt or almost had your first attempt in high school, I had my first attempt when I was in middle school. So my first suicide attempt was in middle school, and that's not actually uncommon, for, unfortunately, especially now with social media, I feel like it's increased even more. But
it has, yes.
I was bullied so heavily in middle school. Middle school is vicious. I think it's actually worse than high school because you're still like, so much of your body is transitioning and high school, I feel like they're a tad more mature, but middle school was so brutal for me. And I lived in Orange County, which is racist as hell.
That's where my in-laws live.
I know.
And they would be like, your dad's a gardener, and you're like all the stuff that I like, just being picked on, which by the way is fine, but it's really difficult when white people act like you are servants to them. So I was dealing with that. I was dealing with, my own sexuality and the fact that people didn't think I was attractive. So that was heartbreaking for me. And then literally being bullied for my body, and that I OD'd when I was in middle school, and very lucky that I lived. But what I would say is being okay. Also, not shaming girls is another thing. I developed really early, very early. And I think we often make women feel that they should be ashamed. I think also girls that get curves when they're younger, it's kind of terrifying to me that they're sexualized when it's just bodies. There's America Chavez, who is a Latina Marvel character. One of the iterations of her, certain times she's in college, certain times she's in high school. This iteration of her, she had tits. She had a butt and ass and tits and thighs. And people were like, you sexualized her and all this stuff. I'm like, no, she's just a soccer player. Like, she looks like how I did when I was in high school. It's really weird to me that you don't allow women to just have their bodies without it being sexual. And I think that is also, I want to say, a common thing with women of color, that they get heavily sexualized when they develop early, but just women in general, that really is terrifying to me. So I think, periods should be a thing that aren't shameful, just making sure that women feel okay, that young girls feel okay in their bodies, that they're able to see positive representation of their bodies, I think is really important. Not shaming them for eating. That was another thing I was heavily shamed for eating. And that can be I developed an eating disorder. And so I think it's all of that. But I definitely think, aside from just letting them know that they are beautiful, I think we need to make sure that that's not the only thing that we're propping them up about, because if that gets taken away, or they feel, if their appearance is changing, that could be really scary if that's your one stable thing.
Yeah.
So that's my body positivity thing. But I also am aware it's a really fascinating place I found myself in, right? Because I was bullied so heavily that I tried to kill myself. And yet now I found myself, I'm not plus sized. I'm not, I'm average size. I'm actually less. I think the average American woman is actually bigger than me. So I think it's an interesting conversation, and one that I have to be aware of my privilege. And I realized this when talking with my friend. My friend was like, she kind of wrote a post on Facebook and was like, these bitches that are like, you're not even double digits and you guys are acting. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I'm not double digits. And and so I got in an argument with her, and it was so fascinating because she was like, Dani, and yet you're still, I was like, I was literally bullied. Like I literally had an eating disorder that I had to get help for, and yet realizing she still has it harder than me. That's, I think there's privileges on a spectrum. That's what I hope a lot of people take away from this. I have privilege on a spectrum as being a Latina, being the skin color that I am, being how I sound. I don't have as much privilege as, say, you or other people, even in my community, but I have a level of privilege. And then I have a level of body privilege that some of my friends don't. It doesn't matter if, yes, I might still deal with racism, sexism, trolls. I definitely deal with people still telling me that I'm ugly, like never to invite me back because I have a strong jaw, and people be like, you look like a man, or she's fat, or like all these things. But truth be told, I still have more privilege than, say, my plus size friends. And so I think it's just DBT, realizing the and is like, yes, I deal with this, and I still have more privilege than some of the other people in my community. And so that is so helpful, again, that both of those things can exist.
Yeah. So Dani, we would love to have you back. So you could always come back if you want. We have been trying out a new segment of the show where Eddie and I talk about a thing that we've watched or played or whatever. And originally I had workshopped this as being called Dadstractions, like distractions for the, I don't know if that
We love the
works,
puns.
but the last time we did this was the TV show Generation on HBO Max, which somehow speaks to me. I'm almost 45 years old, and I'm relating to the queer main character who reminds me a lot of my best friend who is gay and mixed race and moved to Hawaii and is now a farmer. So I don't know how that is worked out that he thought I was going to do that. But this week I've been watching a show called Made for Love on HBO Max as well, which I didn't know what it was. And it's the main concept of this show is it's the near future, and a big tech mogul has come up with this technology of a chip that you can put in couples' brains to have them merge consciousnesses and take away any sort of secrets. And in the process, you probably can guess that issues of consent come into play, because the woman, played by Kristen Milioti, doesn't know she already has the chip implanted in her head, and the husband is very controlling and doesn't know how to basically interact in the world and in society, and just wants to find love. All the while her father is played by Ray Romano, who is dealing with the grief and loss of his wife, and instead of connecting with a real person, falls in love with a sex doll. And it's this funny but dramatic show about consent and connection in a reality where we as a society are heavily immersed in technology and gadgets and screens that take us away from ourselves. Eddie, do you have anything?
I do. Yeah. So, we were talking about layers of privilege. I've recently identified with that in some significant ways. I went public with it on Twitter. I'll go public with it now. I was recently diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum. So with Asperger's, and so it's been this has been a long time coming, working with various doctors and trying to get that squared away. But a big part of what was able to help me was my friend Sarah Kerchak, who is an author, and I recently read through her memoir called "I Overcame My Autism and All I Got Was This Lousy Anxiety Disorder," a memoir.
Hilarious.
Yeah, she's great. Super, super funny. She writes for Fanbyte and Vice and Consequence of Sound. Really good, talented writer. But I encourage anybody who either knows someone who is neurodiverse or has children who are neurodiverse. This is a great way to look at autism spectrum disorder from an adult lens, to help remind everybody that autism does not end at 5, and that there are far worse things than simply having sort of a neurodivergent profile. But yeah, go check it out.
And I didn't at all tell you, Dani, that we do stuff like this, but if there's a thing that you're into this week that you want to tell people to watch, listen to, play, read, whatever, let me know.
I'm always into Ted Lasso. I adore it so much. It's so great and positive, and I just think we need more of that. Also, Dairy Girls, which is heavily recommend. It's about these high school girls, but I have a feeling you'll relate to them as well. It's 4 girls in Derry, Ireland. It's set in the 90s, and it's a great comedy. It's hilarious, but it's essentially, my family being Catholic, they're super Catholic. And so it's dealing with Catholics versus Protestants, Ireland versus Irish versus British, and just like a ton of humor, but it had to do with the occupation and war that was taking place in the 90s. And these girls are trying to go to high school during that time. So it's really fascinating. It's like hardcore comedy, but also has some elements of like, they're dealing with like bombs and other things happening in the IRA, but it's very, very funny. And the nuns in it are so funny, and the priest, and it's just like a really hilarious, they're, at Catholic school. And so it's just a really funny comedy.
I think Dairy Girls is that
Netflix.
Hulu?
Yeah,
Netflix. Yeah.
Got it. All right. Dani, my goodness. I knew that we were going to get into some things, but I am so excited that you came on and spoke. Before we go, do you want to tell the people listening how to find you if online?
Sure. I'm at Ms. Dani Fernandez. It's MSDANIFERNANDEZ. I would say just remember I'm a person. I do my best when I'm don't think anyone's perfect, but I don't know. That's all. Please don't write me if you're like mad. I'm sure a lot of people get mad at me and I've dealt with enough in my life. So
Yeah. Yeah,
everybody, again,
that's
we can exist in an and we can exist. You can have your opinion and you can understand that,
I feel like a big problem there is social media. You don't have that person in front of you. So then you just get immersed in your own self-important issues. And that can usually align with anxiety, hate, anger, like the bad stuff. I usually just tell people to put the phone down and go for a walk, go outside, but play ball. Read a book. I don't know, eat an apple. Dani, this has been wonderful. I am so happy to have you here. I'm sure Eddie is as well. Once again, this is episode number 13 of the Dadward Spiral. I know we talked about spiraling earlier. We talked about a lot of things. Once again, if you enjoy the show, please give us a review, subscribe, like us, send us candy. I don't know. I know Eddie likes candy. I said flowers just because Mother's Day is coming up, and that would defeat me having to go out to a store, and I could give flowers to my wife from all of you, which would be actually really lazy of me. So forget that suggestion. Next week, we are going to be having Drew Daywalt on the show. Drew Daywalt started as a horror filmmaker who is now a best-selling children's book author. And I'm excited to talk to him about the journey from scaring the shit out of people to educating the young ones. But until then, Eddie, is there anything else you wanted to say?
No, just thank you again, Dani, for coming aboard. And the cool thing is that we've actually got a pretty stacked guest roster coming up, kind of kicking off with Dani. We're now entering into a block of some folks who I think are going to have some really interesting perspectives on the show. So definitely a big part of the reason why Aaron started the show and why I wanted to be a part of it was the folks we get to talk to along the way. It's the friends we dadded along the way.
Dani, is there any final thing you would like to say to our listeners before we go?
No, I just please be nice and
please be nice. Yes. That's
I'm sorry if I didn't answer something exactly. And again, I'm trying to acknowledge the spectrum that, a lot of these answers don't have a clear, in my opinion, answer. And I think also just realizing that if you had 97,000 followers, you would have to probably think about a lot of other people that aren't just yourself. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm trying to do gracefully. And I think it's better actually to have these conversations than to shut them down and not have them at all. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that there's necessarily a right answer to anything that I said, but I think hopefully it's worth talking about and kind of looking at maybe some of the more forgotten people in our communities and how we can listen to them a little bit more.
Yes, 100%. We always try to say, be kind, and kindness is a thing that it seems so simple of a concept. But once I became a dad, I started really reflecting on my own negativity and grumpiness and just output into the world. And now I'm trying so hard to operate from a place of love instead of fear. So we like to say it's chaos, be kind, to paraphrase Michelle McNamara, Patton Oswalt's late wife, and from Eddie, myself, and Dani. Until next time we speak, be excellent to each other. Thanks for listening.
James Baldwin once wrote, "I am what time, circumstance, and history have made of me, certainly. But I am also much more than that." And that's really why I wanted to start Black on Black. My name is Julian Michael. I'm a comedian, I'm a writer, I'm an educator. I do a lot of things, but really, Black on Black isn't about me. It's about sharing stories of all kinds of people from across the diaspora. And I hope that when you listen, you'll learn something, you'll enjoy, and you'll start a conversation. Check out Black on Black right here on Dragon Wagon Radio.
It's Dragon Wagon.